Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Are you looking for the very best gaming laptop computer value today? You've come to the right place. This is an amazing computer. 20 games benchmarked, charts and everything at the end of the video, but I'm including live footage here so you can see real-time performance of just how well this performs. Now, I have previously uploaded detailed benchmarks of each of these games in separate videos. However, one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten from a lot of you is, too many videos, just put it all in one place. I could just show you a chart. I think benchmark charts are terrible for reflecting the real performance of a machine. Instead, you can see the actual games being played here with the MSI real-time afterburner numbers in the upper left-hand corner, so you can see how the games really perform. What's the frame rate really like? How much RAM is being used? How much VRAM is being used? What percentage of the CPU and the GPU is being used? It gives you much more information about the true capabilities of this machine. Linked down in the video description below will be the full playlist of the individual videos. If you wish to see the entire gameplay, if you wish to see the 5 to 10 minute long videos on each game, that will be down in the video description below. The link to Amazon, where I bought this laptop, and so should you if you want the very best value in gaming laptops today. As you can see from the real-time performance numbers on this game, this laptop is truly overkill for Counter-Strike Global Offensive. You simply don't need this kind of laptop, but if you want crazy frame rates, it will certainly do it. 6 cores, 12 threads, up to 4.1 gigahertz. We have an i7-8750H. This is an amazing CPU, it truly is, and substantially faster than the last year's model, which was an i7-7700HQ, faster in clock speed, more cores, better all the way around. 6 Gigabite GTX 1060, we have 16 gigs of RAM, an NVMe solid state drive, and 144 Hz IPS display. I really do love this laptop. For a relatively modest amount of money, all things considered, yeah, I know it's not the cheapest thing in the world, it is amazing. League of Legends, likewise, this laptop is overpowered. I'm actually showing you these games in order from fastest to slowest. So CSGO will have the highest frame rate, League of Legends will have the next highest, and as we run through the 20 games, these are actually in order of performance, so they'll progressively get slower as we work our way down the list. We are using 15% of the CPU and about, 36% of the graphics card. Neither one of them are basically stressed whatsoever. You might be asking, why isn't it running faster then? Clock speed, 3.9 gigahertz. It's essentially using 2 cores. It isn't going to run any faster because it's CPU bottleneck. Yes, with an i7-8750H, it is bottlenecking in League of Legends because it only uses 2 cores. Now here in Overwatch, we are running at basically full GPU power. Notice we're at 98% on the GTX 1060. The GTX 1060 is what's preventing this from going faster. The CPU a little bit, but we are using all 6 cores. In fact, there we are at 50% usage. It's a 6-core 12-thread chip. So remember, 6 cores is 50%, 12 cores is 100%. Clock speed's a little bit lower than League of Legends as well because we're using more cores. The turbo speed, how fast the CPU runs, depends upon how many cores we're using. But this is still up to 500 megahertz faster than last year's model with 50% more cores. It's actually really, really amazing. This laptop has a 144 Hz IPS display. So you actually would be able to see all, or at least most of these frames if you were playing the game on the laptop rather than watching on YouTube. Of course, you can only see 60 frames per second here on YouTube, but with the laptop in front of you, it is impressive. Now as we jump into the built-in benchmark of F1 2017, all the others I've shown you so far are live gameplay. There's a couple of built-in benchmarks for time and testing purposes and whatnot. Look at this, we're at hundreds of frames per second, absolutely gorgeous, 2.7 gigabytes of VRAM, 6 gigabytes of main system RAM. You could live stream this game using GPU encoding. It'd run maybe 5 or 10% slower, but it wouldn't be a huge impact. You could record this game, you could be multitasking, doing other things in the background. You've got plenty of RAM, plenty of CPU power available. The graphics card is chugging along at over 1700 megahertz. It's basically a desktop GTX 1066 gig. It's 100 to 200 megahertz slower, but it's all the CUDA cores of a desktop 6 gig card. Very impressive performance. Now we have World of Warships. If you are a fan or a follower of my channel, then you know I play a ton of this. I live stream it on Twitch. I'm a wargaming community contributor. And yes, of course, I'm not going to not test this game here. Notice that the graphics chip is not fully occupied. We're only using 50% of the graphics card. We're only using 14 to 16% of the CPU. Again, games don't all use 6 cores, 12 threads yet. We are CPU bottlenecked in this game at 1080p high detail. However, what it does mean is that our frame rate will be more consistent as we play because the graphics card percentage will vary while holding up the frame rate. It also means live streaming would be trivial. In fact, live streaming with an unlimited uncapped frame rate on this computer would essentially at 1080p have zero performance impact because there's spare graphics card performance to do it. Or set it to 60 frames per second if you want even more and have it run cooler and quieter. Now we're taking a look at Fortnite. Now Fortnite is using 8 gigs of RAM, but again, we don't have a problem here. We've got 16 gigs. It is fully utilizing the graphics card. This is a free-to-play game. It's incredibly, ridiculously, insanely popular. I don't benchmark it very often because I don't personally play it like I do World of Warships, but I included it here because I know a lot of people are going to want to buy a laptop like this for Fortnite. Notice the CPU basically has very little to do. The graphics card is what the big demand and draw here is. Now you could live stream Fortnite on this laptop, but you'd take a 5 or 10% performance hit. But we are in fact over 100 frames per second, so a 5 or 10% hit is like 5 or 10 frames per second. Or, because you have so much CPU power available, you could use CPU encoding and you might not take a hit at all. Now while we do all this, for those of you curious, here's World of Tanks. I am recording this, the temperatures here, it's just sitting on a desktop, it's not on a lap, but it's also not on a cooling pad. The laptop is running in stock configuration, there's no overclocking, underclocking, overvolting, or undervolting. This is how you get it out of the box. It is running in about a 72 degree C or about a 22, 23 degree C ambient temperature room, but there's no fans blowing on the laptop, it's just simply sitting on the desk as I benchmark it. World of Tanks. Hundreds of frames per second, well, over 100 frames per second. The graphics card is the primary limit here. There are times and places where the CPU would be a limitation, but we're running, 3.9 gigahertz. That's 500 megahertz faster than last year's model. I do have last year's model. You'll see it on the desk at some point with a comparison with this one. But again, main system RAM's not an issue, VRAM's not an issue. So with the 144 hertz IPS display, you actually would see all these frames. That's pretty cool. Now we're going to take a look at For Honor. For Honor is not a game that I play, so I'm using the built-in benchmark. It is gorgeous. Maybe I should play it. I don't know. We are primarily graphics card limited here. In fact, most of the limitations of this machine ultimately are going to come down to the graphics card. It's a very, very good graphics card, but a GTX 1060 will, in modern AAA games, find that the graphics card is the primary limit. Depends upon your point of view. We are over 100 frames per second. That's still pretty good considering the detail level. Some people have asked me, well, why would you want this new 6-core 12-thread i7 chip at nearly 4 gigahertz, in this case 3.9? Why wouldn't you want a GTX 1070 or 1080? Great question. You can have it in the Acer Predator Helios 500 for $2,000. It is a faster graphics chip, but it's the same laptop, and the only difference is 1070 versus 1060 for like $800 more. That's an awful value for the money. Yeah, it's faster. I mean, it's nice. Okay, it does come with, I think, a 1 terabyte hard drive in addition to the SSD. Great. Those are $30, $40. But putting that issue aside, it's essentially the same basic laptop with a faster graphics chip. It's nice, but for $800, yeah, thanks, but no. Here is Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5 has a built-in benchmark. I am not using it. Why? Live gameplay means more. It shows the CPU usage. Notice that at times we're getting near to 50%. This game really will use 6 cores. However, the clock speed does drop at bits, the temperature gets quite high, it is using all of the cores, it really is pushing that CPU to the max. You'll see it drop there a little bit. As I said, I don't have this on a thermal pad, I don't have this on a cooling pad, there's no fans blowing on it. Heat is an issue at times. You would not want to game on this laptop. Here's Battlefield 1. You would not want to game on this laptop with it on your lap. It gets hot. I'll talk about that in the main system review. On the desk, it's not too bad. And no, a cooling pad doesn't make a huge difference. I actually have one. I'll show it in the main review. It doesn't make a big difference. The laptop just tends to run pretty warm. In Windows, not gaming, it doesn't. Cool, quiet, not quite all-day power, but most of the day power. The battery's great. When you're not gaming, the graphics chip turns off, the CPU cycles down. It's incredibly efficient. It's incredibly cool. It's incredibly quiet. It is not when gaming, though. I would highly recommend headphones when gaming, because when gaming with headphones, you'll never hear it, but the fans are not quiet. Again, I'll talk about that during the review. Over 100 frames per second here at times. We're using about 50% of the CPU. We're using 6 cores, but at various places in Battlefield 1, it does jump up to 8 threads. You really want a good CPU for Battlefield 1 multiplayer. Now, this is the built-in benchmark for Rise of the Tomb Raider. I didn't used to use this. I actually used to do live gameplay, but only in the beginning section in Siberia on the ice. And what I've discovered is that that's actually not the best place to benchmark it, because these areas here are more demanding. In fact, the one you're seeing here, and it's going to do a quick jump cut because I'm keeping each of these to just a minute each. Here it is. This is so much more demanding, and other places in the game are more demanding. I stopped using Siberia as the benchmark test because I actually don't think it was being fair. It wasn't showing the harder areas. So here you can see the graphics chip is 100% utilized. The CPU is getting a good solid workout, and we're mid 80 frames per second. As we work our way up to the games that run slower, you may notice some of them start running hotter. That's getting into the 80 to 84 degree temperature range, but it's not always going to be like that. Take a look at Sniper Elite 4. Notice the CPU usage is much lower. We're at, 20% there instead of the 40 to 50% in Rise of the Tomb Raider. Notice the temperatures are 10 to 15 C cooler than they were because the CPU is not being worked as hard. Something that I probably should have said at the beginning of this, and I think I might open the main review with it, which hasn't been filmed yet as of the date of this voiceover, although the charts and everything are being set up for it, which is why I decided to go ahead and do this, to give you guys the short, sweet version if you want to see all of it. If you want to play any current game at 1080p at 60 plus frames per second, this laptop will do it. If you want to play casual games and esports titles at 100 to 200 frames per second, this laptop will do it. For what this laptop costs, about $1,200 for the SSD, the RAM, the video card, the CPU, the screen, just the features that come with it, it's very, very compelling. Here's this is Just Cause 3, by the way. Performs really well, all things considered. It's never performed that great on any level of hardware. It's just not the most optimized game. But it is cool because you're essentially playing the Expendables. Here's a challenge for you. Price out an i7-8700. Not even the K chip, just the straight 8700. Price out something like an H370 or a B360 board. Price out 16 gigs of RAM, a 6 gig GTX 1060, a 1080p 144Hz IPS display, pick your size, price out a keyboard, a mouse, a power supply, a case, a copy of Windows, etc., and then see what price you come to. Can you put what I just described together for less than $1,200? Maybe. Remember to include the monitor. Remember to include all the extra stuff that's so easy to leave out. Here's the division. You may find you just end up at $1,200 by the time you've really put the thing together. Now, of course, if you already have case, power supply, etc., if you don't need a monitor, sure, well, then maybe it doesn't make sense. But in terms of the components that you get for the money, this is a screaming deal. It is not a perfect laptop. And the main two deficiencies are temperature and noise. When you're gaming, it's not silent, and when you're gaming, it's not cool. It does not cool running. But it is when you're not gaming. It's just that's entirely up to you. The Division, by the way, is way too much fun. This thing runs awesome. I would have no problem playing the Division on this machine. Now, it wouldn't run quite this fast in the dark zone and the PvP area, but it would be about 60 frames per second, give or take, and you could turn the detail down one notch if you really, really wanted to. But it performs really well. And the Division 2 is coming soon, I believe, early next year, 2019. So I'm sure it'll run very well as well. Now, this is XCOM 2. This is a turn-based game. The frame rate doesn't really matter so long as it's somewhat reasonably good. I have live streamed 3 complete playthroughs of this on Twitch. I love this game. It is entirely too much fun. I blame the mighty Jingles for turning me onto this game. I never would have played it otherwise. I played the original XCOM games back in the 1990s, but I never paid attention to the reboot here until Jingles started posting videos on YouTube about it. That got my attention, and in addition to live streaming 3 full playthroughs, I've played it offline a couple times as well. I've got too much time into this game. Performance is wonderful. It certainly does the job. It's graphics card bound here. There's not much going on CPU-wise because it is, in fact, a turn-based game. All this you're seeing here with the character shooting, this is just pretty art. The clicking and the decision-making, once you see the animation, it's just RNG. The game's already decided what's going to happen. Assassin's Creed Origins. Now we're starting to get down to games that are closer to 60 frames per second. Notice we're sitting there at about 63, 64 frames per second. The graphics card's fully utilized. Notice the CPU is at times jumping. There's 65, 67, there's 69%. For those of you who think that there is no point to a 6-core 12-thread processor for games in 2018, allow me to present you Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, it's not using 100%, but this is the built-in benchmark. It'll use more as you play it. The upcoming Call of Duty Black Ops 4, for example, will use all 12 threads of this chip. I'll benchmark that at some point if this gets a lot of views and if there's demand. Let me know in the comments below whether you want Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the upcoming one, or Black Ops 4, or Battlefield 5, or something else benchmarked. Here's another game that uses a lot of cores and threads, Ghost Recon Wildlands. Another game that I've live streamed. I've completely beaten this game, except for some of the DLCs. The Predator mission is absolutely ridiculous. There's 66, 62, there is 72% right there. This game is using 8, 9-ish threads. It is comfortably over the 6 cores, and it's deep into hyperthreading at that point. Now, all of those extra cores and threads don't necessarily make the game run substantially faster. This game actually will run on a 4-core, 4-thread chip, but it will not run as smoothly. I have tested this on, say, a Ryzen 3 1300X. It does play. It's reasonably good, but there's a little bit more stutter in it. There's a little bit more jumpiness. The whole thing is just not quite as nice of an experience. It's not required that you have this chip, but it is nice. Notice VRAM there was just under 3 gigs. Main system RAM is fine. It's a great machine for a game like Ghost Recon Wildlands. Now here we are in The Witcher 3. I know I'm in the very beginning of the game. If I was starting out in Witcher 3 today, I'd benchmark in one of the cities. I'd benchmark later in the game. I'm not changing it at this point. My days of benchmarking Witcher 3 are probably numbered anyway. Something else is going to come along to replace this. The CPU is barely being touched. What's interesting is the temp of the CPU is warmer than in some of the other games. Go figure. But not all usage is equal. Some games have a more demanding push on the chip. They're using the FPU, AVX instructions, or other things. And then other games are using less of the chip, even if the utilization seems low or high. In any case, the temp's there in the mid-70s. It's respectable, not great. Frame rate's not bad. This is The Witcher 3 at high detail. High detail on both the main graphics and post-processing. Hairwork's turned on and everything, and it's over 60 frames per second. Fallout 4 is an interesting case. Fallout 4 is hard locked to 60 frames per second. Yes, there's hacks. Yes, you can go into the game code or the NVIDIA drivers actually, and you can force VSync off. But if the frame rate gets too high, it starts to act weird. The game is meant and designed and built to run at 60 frames per second. Instead of looking at the frame rate, look at the graphics chip. 1080p, high detail, we're at about 50 to 60% graphics usage. The graphics card runs cooler. The whole system runs cooler. You use less power when you're locked to 60 frames per second. B, if you want to live stream, if you want to record, it uses less of your computer to do so. So the graphics chip and the CPU are both being utilized less here because we're stuck at 60 frames per second. But notice the temps. The temps are 10 to 15 degrees cooler than they are on some of the other games because of the reduced load. And then finally here we have Deus Ex Mankind Divided. This doesn't run well on anything. It's brutal. Well, okay, it does on like a 1080 Ti on the desktop, but even then, we are at 1080p high detail. Now, we are above 60 frames per second, barely. We're in the built-in benchmark and not the game. It is what it is. If you've seen the benchmarks of this before, then you know it's a rough game to benchmark. But it's holding up pretty well considering it's a $1,200 laptop. All things considered, I absolutely love this machine. Benchmark charts in just a second, but let me just say the only thing that I personally added to my machine was a hard drive. There's an open 2.5-inch drive bay. I stuck a 2 terabyte drive in there, and it gives you plenty of room to put your games on, and then Windows and your main programs are on the SSD, and it's a great machine. Finally, that leads us to the benchmark charts. I'm going to show each one of them for 1 minute, so if you need to pause and take a look at them, by all means, but I split it into 4 charts, 5 games per chart, because otherwise it's just completely unreadable. If you cram all this in one chart, you just can't read any of it. These are the 5 highest performing games by the average frame rate. 271 frames per second in CSGO, down to 114 frames per second in World of Warships. Great performance. Take a look at the 1% lows in the middle of the screen. I think these are actually the most important numbers. 99% of the time, you will get at least these frame rates. The 1% lows basically indicate that this is the bottom end of your performance and that 99% of the time it will be something above this number. So 159 frames per second, 99% of the time in CSGO, 67 frames per second, 99% of the time in World of Warships. Great performance. Fortnite, 81 frames per second, 99% of the time. 112 average. That's amazing. GTA 5, very high detail, 64 frames per second, 99% of the time. 99 frames per second, average, so half the time it's above that, roughly half the time below. Battlefield 1, high detail, 61 frames per second in multiplayer, real busy live gameplay, not a benchmark, not single player, 99% of the time. These are really good performance numbers for what the hardware is. For the GTX 1060, for a laptop, which is obviously running on a limited power envelope, these are really good numbers. For games like World of Tanks, 83 frames per second, 99% of the time, even 99.9% of the time at the 0.1% low, it still does 71 frames per second. That's really nice. Rise of the Tomb Raider, the built-in benchmark, 62 frames per second, 99% of the time. Sniper Elite 4, high detail, 70. Just Cause 3. Just Cause 3 falls down a bit, but this game is known to be a bit ridiculous when it comes to this sort of thing. 44 frames per second, but look at the average, 90. It's okay, but that's Just Cause 3. The Division, it's not bad, but again, it's just below 60 frames per second at 55 versus 78 average, and then XCOM 2 doesn't really matter. XCOM 2 is just fine on this machine. Speaking of which, do you see the H next to each of those names? Each of these was done in high detail. VL is very low, VH is very high, U is ultra, H is high. I just put them there as the short abbreviation so you knew what detail setting I tested them in. GTA 5, for example, was very high, CSGO was very low, so I changed it depending upon what was being played and what was being tested. And that brings us to our final 5 games. Assassin's Creed Origins in the built-in benchmark, 67 average, 51 1% low. Ghost Recon Wildlands, high detail mind you, real live gameplay, 65 frames per second average, 46 frames per second, 1% low. Absolutely smooth and playable. It didn't hold 60-100% of the time, but it was very playable. Witcher 3, granted, where I was testing it, 63 and 51, but I did have Hairworks turned on. Turn that off, turn shadows down. In fact, in all of these AAA games, turn a couple of the settings off, turn either shadows off or hair works or one of the two settings off, you may get a 20 to 25% frame rate boost. I'm running the presets, you don't have to. Fallout 4, of course, averaged 60. It dipped down in a few places. I played obviously a lot longer than I showed you. And then the built-in benchmark for Deus Ex Mankind Divided is the only game where the average was below 60, but not by much, but that's Mankind Divided. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section. Check the links in the video description. The link to Amazon.com where I bought this laptop. Acer did not send it to me. A link to Amazon where you can buy it will be down there. It is a great machine, and for about $1,200, at least that's the normal retail price, it is a huge value in my opinion. I cannot recommend it enough if performance for the dollar, if value for the money is what you want. So long as when it's gaming, a little bit of fan noise or a medium amount of fan noise and heat are not primary concerns. If you have a solid tabletop to put it on, the temperature is not an issue. And if you have headphones on, the noise isn't an issue. Non-gaming, it is wonderful. I will also link to the full playlist down there where you can view all of these benchmarks in their entirety. Do me a favor, go throw that playlist on play and leave them running in the background. Enjoy my extended commentary on each game if you're interested. And then watch out for the full system review coming soon to the main Tech Deals channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.